The universe had a cruel sense of humor. It had given him a face sculpted by angels and a heart colder than a tombstone. For a man who wore a mask of professional perfection so well, it was a wonder he didn't simply ascend into the stratosphere to glare down alongside the sun. The air in the Monday morning stand-up was thin enough to slice. Silence reigned as the man at the head of the table, Damien Hawthorne, once again expressed his displeasure. He didn't raise his voice. He simply slid the rejected proposal back across the polished mahogany, the quiet scrape of paper on with a gunshot in the stillness. Chloe couldn't stop herself from firing off a text to Ash, the man she'd only ever known through a screen. She wondered if Damien's perpetual rage was cyclical, a monthly affliction of the soul. Such a monstrous personality, she typed, would surely be a fascinating subject for posthumous psychological study. Ash, who usually replied in an instant, was quiet. His last message had come just before the meeting began. A simple, warm assurance that his beautiful, kind-hearted girl would have a day filled with good fortune. It was the kind of emotional validation that could buffer any blow. But today, fortune was not on her side. Ms. Vaughn. Her name, spoken in that low, incisive tone, made her flinch. Chloe rose to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. She met a gaze as sharp and unforgiving as broken glass. Damien's features were all hard lines and severe angles, radiating an aura of absolute authority. He informed the room that her team's proposal had been rejected for 2 consecutive weeks, then asked if she had anything to say before she started exploring other career avenues. It was the most elegantly phrased threat of termination she had ever heard. She took a steadying breath, apologizing and promising her team would redouble their efforts, aiming for a satisfactory submission by the following week. She couldn't read his expression to know if the response was adequate, but the tense meeting finally concluded under the weight of his frigid silence. As Chloe gathered her notebook, ready to flee, her phone buzzed. Ash, who had been silent for 2 hours, had finally returned. A cascade of messages filled her screen. He couldn't believe such tyrants still existed in the modern workplace. He lamented that his baby had to endure such treatment. A stream of crying cat memes followed, their digital tears mirroring the sympathy in his words. Her foul mood began to evaporate. Just as she was about to reply, a flicker of movement from the head of the table caught her eye. Damien was still there, head bent over his phone. His lips, usually pressed into a thin, hard line, were relaxed. The glacial chill in his eyes had thawed, replaced by a softness that transformed his entire face. It was disconcerting, like seeing a statue weep. Chloe fled the conference room as if she'd seen a ghost. Minutes later, more notifications chimed. Ash had sent a series of Venmo payments. The screen filled with $20 transfers, each with a comment. One was for the broken heart of a man thousands of miles away who couldn't be there to comfort his baby. Another was for her to buy herself something to cheer up. He asked why she'd gone silent, pleading that the tyrant's anger wasn't his fault, that she shouldn't ignore him. He typed out a string of plaintive, whimpering text emojis. Seeing his digital panic, even his use of his real name, Ash, in a moment of desperation, made a genuine laugh escape her. Their relationship had been an accident. Chloe had a weakness for handsome faces and chiseled abs, but she was wary of the predators that often came with such packages. To test the waters without risking her heart, she'd posted a faceless photo highlighting her physique on an anonymous fitness community app. Amidst a sea of crude direct messages, Ash had been different. He'd only ever liked her posts silently. After she took the initiative and asked for a picture in return, their story began. They had an agreement. No faces, only physiques. For 2 years, it had been a perfect harmony, a digital sanctuary where the crushing weight of her career was met with absolute comfort and warmth. Ash, initially a man of few words, had blossomed into a doting, affectionate partner who wasn't afraid to be clingy. In the few seconds she'd been lost in thought, 10 more Venmo notifications appeared, the memo on each reading voluntary donation. Alarmed, she refunded them all. A new message popped up immediately, his tone laced with hurt. He asked if she was rejecting his love, if she didn't want him anymore. She quickly reassured him that wasn't the case at all, teasingly adding that she was simply saving up for more of his love later that night. The reply was instantaneous, the digital equivalent of a happy puppy getting a treat, its tail wagging with stars in its eyes. That night, Ash's voice was a low, seductive rumble. In the video, his face was obscured as always, but the sight of his toned, bronze skin and the clear definition of his abdominal muscles was intoxicating. Her own voice became a broken, breathless whisper in response. He murmured her name, his husky tone so vivid it felt like he was right beside her. Later, clean from a shower and blissfully spent, she was about to fall asleep when a notification from her work app pinged. It was an announcement for a business trip to Austin the next day. She groaned. It was her third trip this month. They might as well relocate the company. She typed a sarcastic reply meant for a colleague, complaining about the constant travel. To her horror, she sent it to the company-wide group chat by mistake. The chat, normally buzzing, fell dead silent. The only new entry was the system notification. Chloe Vaughn has retracted a message. The social death was absolute. Private messages from her work friends flooded in, offering condolences. One of them added a chilling postscript. She'd forgotten to mention that Damien Hawthorne was going on the trip, too. Her heart seized. Before she could read any more, she frantically switched to her personal account to share her misery with Ash. He latched onto one detail. Austin, he said it was a coincidence. He had a business trip there tomorrow as well. He became electric with excitement, suggesting that this was their chance. He asked, his words tentative and full of hope, if they could finally meet. It wasn't the first time he'd brought it up. She had always demurred, terrified that the reality wouldn't live up to the fantasy, that she'd be disappointed by his face, or he by hers. The mystery was part of the allure, but this time the timing felt too perfect. His palpable excitement, even through the screen, began to erode her defenses. He must have sensed her hesitation. After 2 minutes of silence, he began to backtrack, typing that he understood it was a work trip and she would be exhausted, suggesting they could wait. But her reply was already sent. Okay. His typing icon vanished, then reappeared. A few seconds later, a message came through. He asked if she had just agreed. He needed confirmation. When she sent a simple thumbs up, her screen exploded with a torrent of exclamations, a string of ahs that conveyed a joy so pure it made her smile. She had her reservations. Sometimes, she thought Ash's voice sounded uncannily like her boss's. She tried to picture Ash with Damien's flawlessly sculpted face. Surely, she reasoned, Ash couldn't be unattractive. The next day, Chloe understood what her colleague's unread message had been about when she found her assigned seat in first class was directly next to Damien Hawthorne. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored, expensive suit, his tie and watch chosen with meticulous care. He looked even more formal than usual, but a faint bluish tint beneath his eyes suggested a sleepless night. Forcing the bright, professional smile of a corporate drone, she greeted him. Mr. Hawthorne, already seated, looked up. His dark eyes were as devoid of warmth as ever. He gave a clipped nod, which counted as a response. To her immense relief, He didn't mention her gaffe in the group chat. She settled into her seat, perching on the edge of the plush leather. Before she could relax, his voice cut through the quiet. "I appreciate you handling this trip, Ms. Vaughn." It sounded polite, but she heard the underlying message, a direct reference to her earlier complaint. The man was a vindictive devil. She replied with practiced deference, stating it was her honor and duty to contribute to the company's success. A smirk touched his lips, a cold, humorless expression. He didn't even look at her, clearly immune to such corporate platitudes. She knew that if this trip was not a success, her career at his company was likely over. An oppressive silence filled the cabin. With the Ice King beside her, she didn't dare check her phone. Since she had agreed to meet, Ash had been texting her every few minutes, his excitement from the previous night apparently not having waned in the slightest. She had to resist the urge to reply. Instead, she risked a sideways glance at the man beside her. Annoyance aside, his face was a work of art, aesthetically perfect. The lines of his profile were severe, carved with a precision that made him seem unapproachable. But at that moment, with his gaze lowered to his phone, a sliver of morning light caught his eyes, softening their intensity. As his long fingers tapped across the screen, the tight line of his mouth eased. He was clearly messaging someone important to him. It was an office mystery. No one knew anything about Damien Hawthorne's personal life. In all his years at the company, he'd never been seen with anyone, male or female. For a man with his status, wealth, and looks to be so utterly alone was strange. The charitable interpretation was that he was discreet. The less charitable one was that he was destined to be alone forever. As if sensing her scrutiny, he looked up. The fleeting warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced instantly by the familiar, intimidating coldness of the executive everyone feared. Chloe pitted whoever was on the other end of those texts. Who could stand to be in a relationship with a block of ice? She quickly straightened up, staring ahead. Her own phone vibrated again, a frantic buzz against her leg as the plane prepared for takeoff. It was Ash. He was about to take off too, he wrote, so filled with happiness at the thought of finally seeing her that he felt like he could float. She never got the chance to reply. Hours later, after being informed by the hotel in Austin that her corporate booking had been lost, and the only available space for the night was sharing the penthouse suite booked for Mr. Hawthorne, it took every ounce of her self-control not to scream. When her colleagues asked her later why she wasn't smiling, she wanted to say it was because her soul had left her body. Looking at Damien's thunderous expression, it was clear the news hadn't pleased him either. Fearing he might banish her to a hotel an hour away, forcing her to sacrifice precious sleep before their early morning client meeting. She quickly spoke up, saying she wouldn't mind the arrangement for one night. The crease between his brows deepened enough to trap an insect. He turned and walked ahead, his entire posture radiating irritation. Fortunately, the suite had 3 separate bedrooms. As long as she stayed in hers, she could avoid him. Once she was settled and had finished her work, she finally checked her messages from Ash. A series of mock official reports filled the screen. Agent Cutie Pie had arrived safely at the destination. Lodging secured, all systems go. He then added that the long flight seemed to have left him with a strange side effect, an emptiness in his chest. But after opening their chat, he realized it wasn't a side effect. He just missed his baby. The reality of their impending meeting finally began to sink in, and her heart began to race with a nervous, matching excitement. She decided then that even if Ash wasn't handsome, he would still be the best Ash in the world. He was nothing like her boss, who acted like the world owed him $1 billion. She texted him, asking what was the first thing he wanted to do when they met. His reply was immediate. He wanted to hold her, lift her up so she could feel the power of a 6'3" man. And then he wanted to kiss her. Her forehead, her nose, and finally her lips. He wrote that her voice was so beautiful, her lips must be even better to kiss. Her reflection in the mirror was flushed red. Normally, a conversation like this would have escalated to a video call. But with her boss in the next room, she had to restrain herself and decline. When she explained why, Ash exploded. He couldn't believe the tyrant was so inescapable. He demanded to know if the man had bothered her. She assured him he hadn't, but Ash was unconvinced and insisted on a video call just to check. On the screen, Ash had already showered and was wearing a deep blue silk pajama shirt. "Baby, that tyrant," he began, his voice full of shared indignation, but then he abruptly stopped. She asked him what was wrong. He hesitated, then said it was nothing, just that her background looked familiar. His room was lit only by a dim bedside lamp, his camera angled to show only his torso. Chloe dismissed it. Austin was a big city. It wasn't impossible he'd stayed in a similar hotel before. She expected him to press for the hotel's name, to rush over in his eagerness to meet. Instead, he asked why she and her boss were sharing a suite. She explained the booking error and the tight schedule, finishing with a joke about Damien's foul expression, saying you'd think he was the one being put out. After she finished her story, the line went silent for a long time. When she asked what was wrong, he said it was nothing, then claimed a work emergency had come up and abruptly ended the call. Thinking it was important, she didn't disturb him further. But as the hours passed and she got ready for bed, he never messaged back. She wondered if the prospect of meeting had made him nervous. Climbing out of bed, she untied the belt of her silk robe, letting it fall open to reveal the CK underwear beneath. She turned slightly, letting the camera focus on the small, dark mole on the curve between her waist and hip. Ash loved it. When they finally met, he would probably. The thought made her mouth go dry. Convinced that even a workaholic like Damien would be asleep by now, she tiptoed out of her room to get a glass of water. As she flicked on a small lamp in the living area, the light illuminated a figure on the sofa. Damien sat there, staring intently at his phone, his expression as grave as if he were making a billion-dollar decision. She had miscalculated the obsessive nature of the man. Before she could process the oddly familiar silk pajamas he was wearing, or retreat back into her room, she instinctively pulled her robe tighter. At the movement, he looked up. Their eyes met. For the first time, Chloe saw a complex storm of emotions in his gaze. It was a tangible force that swept over her, from her head to her toes, finally lingering on the now visible mole at her hip. Shock, confusion, and then a profound, inexplicable guilt, as if he'd been caught doing something terribly wrong. The intensity of his stare was unnerving. She stammered an apology, saying she thought he was asleep. As the words left her mouth, his dark eyes widened. Even as she poured her water and retreated, she could feel his burning gaze on her back. Back in her room, her phone lit up. It was Ash, finally breaking his 2-hour silence. He typed slowly, "Baby, what if? And this is just a hypothetical. What if I turned out to be a lot like the devil boss you're always talking about?" Thinking of the look she'd just received, a shiver ran down her spine. She replied without a second thought, "I'd probably pack my bags and flee the country." She tried to make it a joke, asking him why he'd ask such a thing. That tyrant was vengeful, petty, and cold-blooded. Her wonderful boyfriend couldn't possibly be anything like him. The reply was hesitant. He told her she was praising him too much. She could sense his unease through the screen, that same strange guilt she'd seen in Damien's eyes. After she pressed him, he finally admitted it. He thought maybe meeting now was too rushed. He asked if they could postpone. His behavior was completely out of character, but she reasoned that meeting in person was a huge risk. It was only natural for him to have his own anxieties and to get cold feet. She agreed. But sleep did not come easily that night. She tossed and turned, wondering if her own lack of enthusiasm had made him retreat. After 2 years, maybe it was time to consider showing their faces. The next morning, her alarm had to go off 4 times before she finally dragged herself out of bed. She knew she was in trouble. Opening her bedroom door, she saw him, Damien Hawthorne, fully dressed and ready to go, sitting on the sofa. He was the kind of person who despised tardiness. She took a deep breath and prepared for the worst. As she walked towards him, ready to apologize profusely, he spoke first. "Have you had breakfast?" She noticed a bag from an upscale bakery on the coffee table in front of him. It was definitely not from the hotel. When she just stood there, stunned, he frowned. "No matter how busy you are, you shouldn't skip breakfast. Is this how you usually take care of yourself?" The last of her sleepiness vanished, replaced by sheer bewilderment. She ate the breakfast under his watchful eye, the gourmet pastry tasting like sawdust in her mouth. She couldn't fathom what she had done to deserve this last meal before her execution. The good news was that she would be moving into her own room that day. The bad news came later. When she went to the front desk after her meetings, the receptionist looked just as confused as she felt. "But when we called Mr. Hawthorne's suite this morning to confirm, he said an extra room was no longer necessary." When she brought this up with him, he looked at her with genuine puzzlement. "Do you not like staying here?" The question was so absurd, given his blatant disgust the day before, that she was momentarily speechless. She forced a laugh. "Of course not. I just don't want to disturb you or ruin your mood." His brow furrowed slightly. Was my displeasure that obvious? Her head had already started nodding before her brain could stop it. She quickly shook her head, denying it. He looked away, his voice quiet. "I apologize. I didn't realize. It won't happen again." Chloe stood frozen. Either her career was about to end in a truly spectacular fashion, or Damien Hawthorne had been possessed by a benevolent spirit. That night, she discussed the bizarre turn of events with Ash. He suggested that maybe her boss was being sincere. Chloe scoffed at the idea. Damien Hawthorne changing his ways was about as likely as the sun rising in the west. Ash's reply was surprisingly defensive. "Maybe he wasn't so bad after all," he typed. She shot back, asking if Ash believed that man was a good person, or if he believed she was the Queen of England. A flood of bowing emojis and declarations of "All hail my queen" followed. The next morning, another gourmet breakfast was waiting for her on the table. She knew she had been right. Something was deeply wrong. She tried to tactfully tell him that the hotel had a buffet and he didn't need to go to the trouble. He was unfazed, dropping another bombshell. He'd already checked, he said, and the buffet didn't have the specific mushroom and Gruyere quiche or the mango panna cotta she liked. A boss who suddenly took a granular interest in a specific employee's culinary preferences meant only one thing. He was gathering information. It meant she was under suspicion. It meant she was one step away from being fired. Yet, over the next few days, the special treatment continued. It started with breakfast, then expanded to lunch and dinner. Every meal, from the main course to the dessert, was perfectly aligned with her tastes. By the time she flew back to Chicago, she had gained 2 pounds of pure, anxiety-induced weight. Even her colleagues noticed. One pulled her aside, remarking that Mr. Hawthorne seemed to be giving her special treatment. Chloe could only manage a grim smile, replying that it was just a courtesy a king extends to a peasant on their way to the guillotine. But the guillotine never fell. Instead, the company cafeteria underwent a complete overhaul. The menu changed daily, and every dish seemed to have been pulled directly from her list of favorites. During her next video call with Ash, she bemoaned her expanding waistline. He just said he thought it was a good thing. She was too thin, he argued, and needed to eat more. She pressed him, asking how he would know if she was thin. There was a pause. He quickly clarified that just from seeing her figure, he could guess that her face wasn't chubby. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She told Ash that she was convinced the office tyrant was planning something big, lulling her into a false sense of security before a devastating final blow. Ash's defense was immediate and strangely passionate. He was certain her boss had no malicious intent. She asked him why he knew that, and why he was suddenly so quick to defend the man she complained about. The other end of the line went quiet, then came a small, wounded voice. He just felt that the person she hated seemed a little pitiable. She considered this. I don't know if I'd say I hate him, she admitted. His standards are just impossibly high, and the pressure is immense. If she could slack off and get paid, she'd have no reason to dislike any boss. The dreaded Monday morning meeting arrived. Chloe felt a strange sense of foreboding. But the man at the head of the table seemed different, less severe. He was wearing a lighter-colored suit that softened his sharp edges. He didn't yell. He didn't even scowl. He concluded the meeting by thanking everyone for their hard work. It would have been a perfect meeting if he hadn't asked her to stay behind. Ms. Vaughn, the latest proposal is excellent. He looked up, his gaze steady on her. But this job isn't the right fit for you. So it was an illusion after all. She had mentally prepared for this. She took a breath to respond, but he continued before she could speak. I believe the role of executive assistant to the CEO would be a much better use of your talents. Good news. It was a promotion. Bad news. Her new job was to attend to the tiger himself. Her first day as his assistant, she reported the weather. Her second, she arranged flowers for his desk. Her third, she read a novel. She was literally being paid to do nothing. After the 10th time she asked what he needed her to do and was told nothing, just sit there is fine, she came to a conclusion. This wasn't a promotion. It was a new form of psychological torture. The next day, as she was about to get up from the plush chair in his office, he asked if she was bored. She said no. An hour later, a state-of-the-art massage chair was delivered to the office for her. Not even he had one. The feeling of deep unease intensified that evening when he took the car keys from her and gestured for her to get in the passenger seat. She protested that a boss shouldn't be chauffeuring his subordinate. His reply was calm and final. It's fine. I'll drive. The city lights flashed by, painting fleeting patterns inside the silent car. The quiet stretched, thick with unspoken tension. Finally, he asked the question that had been hanging between them. Chloe, are you afraid of me? She denied it. Then don't be so formal with me, he said. You can call me Damien. Calling a CEO by his first name was a cardinal sin in the corporate world. But in the strange, intimate quiet of the car, it felt less like a command and more like a plea. Her gaze, which she hadn't managed to tear away in time, caught the streetlights, illuminating a raw, vulnerable emotion that looked terrifyingly like affection. That night, she recounted the event to Ash. His response was bizarre. Was it that obvious? The phrase was eerily familiar. And wasn't he supposed to be jealous? She fell silent. He messaged again, asking if she didn't like it. What kind of boyfriend responds so calmly to his girlfriend being driven home by her boss? Connecting this to his recent habit of defending his supposed rival, the pieces began to form a disturbing picture. The next day, she received a call that her boss was sick and wouldn't be in. The puzzle was complete. She told Ash the good news. The devil was ill. A moment later, Ash replied, "Baby, I'm sick too." That creeping, horrifying sense of dread washed over her again. All the coincidences, all the oddities, clicked into place. They weren't coincidences at all. She sent a deliberate, calculated text. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I wish I could be there to take care of you." Seconds later, her work phone lit up with a notification. It was from Damien Hawthorne. He was asking her to bring some urgent documents to his penthouse. The silence in her apartment was deafening. On the drive over, everything replayed in her mind. Ash's strange behavior had started on that trip to Austin. His sudden empathy for Damien. His uncanny knowledge of her favorite foods, which had then appeared in the company cafeteria. Her promotion to a stress-free job right after she'd complained about burnout. She had thought of every possible name that could be shortened to Ash, but she had never once considered Damien Hawthorne. She let herself into the penthouse with the code he sent. Only a single entryway light was on, but the dim glow revealed a space that was achingly familiar. She opened the master bedroom door, and the last veil of mystery was torn away. The room, the furniture, the view from the window. It was the background she had seen countless times in her video calls with Ash. The man in the bed was flushed with fever, his eyes closed. At the sound of the door, he stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked weak and helpless, like a large, wounded animal in need of comfort. It was the exact same look of pathetic misery Ash would adopt when he was feeling unwell. He weakly lifted a hand, his lips forming her name soundlessly. "Baby." The unspoken words struck her like a bolt of lightning. The world tilted on its axis. One was the cold, untouchable ice king of the corporate world. The other was a sweet, clingy digital puppy. They couldn't be the same person. As she placed the documents on his nightstand, her eyes fell on his phone. Taking a deep breath, she pulled out her own. "Honey," she texted Ash, "I think I've discovered a secret." A buzz vibrated from the nightstand. Damien's phone screen lit up with her message. Shock, absurdity, disbelief. Ash was Damien Hawthorne. Her devoted online boyfriend was her tyrannical boss. As she walked out of the penthouse, her hurried steps echoing in the silent hall, a wave of cold fury washed over her. He had known. Since that trip to Austin, he had known who she was and had chosen to say nothing. He had watched her, like a fool, stress over his moods, walk on eggshells around him, live in fear of his displeasure. She was home when his messages came through. What secret? Then another. "Baby, I just dreamed you came to see me. I feel so sick, but it's even worse when you don't reply." A notification from a silly app they used followed. A sad little puppy is waiting for attention from his baby. She switched to her work chat. "Damien. Chloe, did you make it home safely? Thank you for coming." She clicked on his profile and hit block. The next few days were quiet, but her heart felt like it had been hollowed out. For 2 years, without the filter of his corporate identity, he had been her constant. He was Ash, the one who saw her through seasons, who stayed up with her through stressful nights, who laughed with her and comforted her. It had been a pure, unfiltered affection. Their nightly goodnight texts had been an unbroken chain for over 800 days. The silence now was unbearable. At the next day's meeting, she sat beside the main chair, a ghost at the feast. She could feel his eyes on her, He was still pale, clearly forcing himself to be there. She chanced to look up and found him staring at her. In that moment, their masks were gone. The gaze that usually held so much pressure for everyone else was now filled with sincerity, helplessness, and a profound, pitiable sorrow. Something inside her cracked. She quickly looked down. The meeting ended and she fled. In the break room, her colleagues were gossiping about the boss's strange behavior. Had he taken up Mad Ion? Why did he keep staring at Chloe? She wasn't in the mood to participate, but she felt a familiar, intense gaze on her back. She turned and forced a laugh for her colleagues. I know, right? So intense. I've never had a boss who was so terrifying. Before the words had fully left her mouth, a hand gripped her wrist. She was pulled from the group, and a second later, she was being pressed against the heavy oak desk in Damien's office. His dark eyes were initially blazing with anger, but when they met her calm gaze, the fire died, replaced by a deep, wounded look. He buried his face in her shoulder, his voice muffled and close to tears. Wife, when have I ever been fierce with you? The hug he had wanted to give her when they first met had finally arrived, months late. She could feel the strength and solidness of his tall frame. Done with the act? She asked coolly, trying to push him away. He only held her tighter. He told her he wasn't trying to deceive her, that he had wanted to confess the day he found out. He then repeated her own words back to her, his voice thick with misery. She had told him if he were the tyrant, she would flee the country. He was terrified she would actually leave. She asked coldly if he was blaming her. He immediately backed down, insisting it was all his fault. He confessed that when he discovered she had blocked him, he had almost driven to her apartment in a panic, but was afraid she wouldn't open the door. He begged her not to push him away, to forgive him, but she did push him away. The powerful CEO, the man who made board members tremble, stood before her with red-rimmed eyes, looking utterly devastated. It wasn't just anger she felt. It was the disorienting clash between Ash and Damien Hawthorne. Even knowing Damien was devastatingly handsome, she had never dared to superimpose that face onto her sweet, gentle Ash. And then there was the chasm between their lives. Without the anonymity of the internet, she was just an ordinary person, a worker bee from a humble background. He was an heir, born with a silver spoon, a CEO at a young age. What could he possibly see in her? Was it a novelty? A desire to translate their digital connection into a physical one? Whatever the reason, she couldn't risk her heart on that gamble. But Damien, now unbound from his digital persona, was not going to let her go. He knew she was struggling to accept it. He begged her for a 1-month probationary period. If at the end of the month she still couldn't accept him, he would respect her choice. He said the words, but the tears welling in his eyes told a different story. His probationary period was an exercise in relentless devotion. The man who had once banned office romances now sought her out for cuddles the moment his office door was closed. 3-course meals were delivered to his office, where he would sit with her while she ate, his handsome face apparently an appetizer. He drove her to and from work, a different bouquet of fresh flowers always waiting in the passenger seat. At work, she saw the demanding, brilliant CEO in action. At night, he put on an apron and meticulously researched recipes that would appeal to her palate, becoming her familiar Ash once more. He was slowly, deliberately closing the distance between them, showing her every facet of his life, proving that the man she feared and the man she loved were one and the same. He fulfilled all the duties of a boyfriend but never crossed the line. Each night, he would walk her to her door, his hands clenching at his sides, fighting the urge to ask for a hug. The man who had been so bold online was now as cautious as a teenager on a first date, terrified of making a single misstep. The next time she entered his penthouse, she noticed the decor had been changed to mirror the style of her own apartment. A space had been cleared for a home office for her. Her clothes were folded neatly on the sofa, creating the illusion they had been living together for years. A month had passed. She sat on the sofa, watching the back of the man who looked so out of place in a kitchen. His tall, aristocratic frame bent over a stove with intense concentration. Every time he finished a dish, he would eagerly bring her the first bite. The evening light streamed in, creating a scene of peaceful domesticity she had only ever dreamed of. As she stood up to meet him, her hand brushed against a small notebook tucked under the sofa cushions. He saw it and his eyes widened in panic, but it was too late. She had already opened it. The first entry was dated 2 years ago. Starting this company has been nothing but anxiety. The only escape is scrolling. Found a new profile today. Just one post. God, I'm so tired. I wanted to ask her why. Is she tired like I am? But I'm not allowed to be tired. I'm not allowed to complain. So I just watched her. Her page grew. She got more followers. I thought she'd forgotten about her first one. Then she messaged me. Another entry. She calls me Ash. She's like the sun. She pulled me out of the dark. Now she's not just her. She's my baby. My wife. A more recent one. I'm going to meet my sunshine. I'm going to hold her and tell her I love her. Then, a frantic scrawl. She blocked me. I sat on the sofa all night, staring at her door, thinking about what would happen if I confessed. The only outcome I couldn't bear was losing her. My son is gone. And the last one. My family is pushing for marriage again. Do they think I don't want to? If my baby would just slap me across the face and forgive me, our wedding rings would already be on her fingers. I shouldn't have told them about her so soon. But how can you not show off someone so perfect? My wife. I know you're worried. I'm your boss, but I'm also the Ash who knows you better than anyone in the world. The rest of the notebook was filled with her name over and over again. The stoic, feared CEO was, in private, a lovesick boy writing in his diary. He was so endearingly foolish. The abrasive shell was just a product of his upbringing. Underneath, he was always her Ash. She thought of her own secrets, her own guarded heart, how his persistent good nights had given her the courage to be vulnerable. She looked up from the notebook, her nose stinging. Why are so many of my clothes here? He blushed. You left them in my car. She raised an eyebrow. He caved immediately. Okay, they had your scent on them and I didn't want to give them back. She smiled. He'd never know that she had left them there on purpose. She looked at the man standing frozen in place with anxiety. Damien, she said, her voice serious. I've been thinking, and our current relationship isn't appropriate. His eyes reddened instantly. Baby, perhaps, she continued, a slow smile spreading across her face. The title of boyfriend would be a better fit. He froze. He stared. Then, a look of pure, unadulterated joy exploded across his features. The 6'3" man launched himself at her, tackling her onto the sofa. A fierce, passionate kiss cut off any further words. He pulled back, breathless, babbling about how he was the happiest man alive, how much he loved her. She answered by pulling his face back down to hers. In the middle of their kiss, he stopped abruptly. Wait, wife, I forgot something. He fumbled in his pocket. At that moment, if he had pulled out a ring, she would have said yes without hesitation. Instead, he produced a slightly squashed piece of cake. Thinking of her recent weight gain, she groaned. Can you please stop feeding me? He looked at her with wide, earnest eyes. But they say loving someone is like tending to a flower. I want to nurture my baby until she's plump and blooming. That's how you feed a pig. She laughed, but she pulled him down for another kiss.